Welcome to the European Parliament in Brussels. I'm Christophe Robeet and it's time for Talking Europe. It's now official. David Cameron will hold a referendum on EU membership if the Conservatives win the next election. Is the British Prime Minister playing with fire, or is it a necessary step to clarify the debate? We'll find out soon on this set. And later in the programme, I'll talk to Karel de Gucht. He's the EU Commissioner for Trade. He warns protectionism can't be the answer to the current crisis. And yes, this week David Cameron pledged to hold an in-out referendum if the Conservatives win the next election. This decision caused a storm of controversy across Europe. We're going to talk about all this with my two guests. Starting to my left, Charles Tannock. Hello, you're a British MEP from the Conservative Party. You listened, of course, very carefully to the speech. You let us know what you think of it. Catherine Trautmann, very welcome to our programme. You're a French MEP from the Socialists and Democrats, former culture minister in France. You're a close ally of François Hollande, who didn't really like the speech, I think, but you'll tell us what you think. Now, before we discuss the impact of the speech, let's watch our report for a reminder.
After weeks of wavering, David Cameron announces Britons will have their say on Europe.
The choice will not be for the politicians. The choice will be for the British people. The fact is, we are not comfortable with the state of our membership today. It does need to change.
First, though, the British Prime Minister says he's looking to renegotiate the country's relationship with the EU.
I'm arguing for changes that all of Europe would benefit from, but in previous negotiations we've already demonstrated that we have been able to repatriate powers, including coming out of the bailout fund. So I'm optimistic that an engaged, positive stance can achieve what is necessary here in Britain's interest.
British business leaders aren't so sure. Some fear being shut out of European markets should the UK opt out. Reaction from abroad has been even more hostile. Germany said Britain could not cherry-pick its level of EU participation. France called the decision dangerous.
Imagine if Europe were a football club. You can join, but once you're in, you can't say you want to play rugby.
Cameron pledged to hold the referendum by the end of 2017 if the Conservatives are re-elected in 2 years' time. The opposition, Labour, called Cameron weak and driven by party interest. Cameron is generally perceived as being pro-Europe, but he's feeling the pinch from Eurosceptics within his own party and also the UK Independence Party, which is drawing votes from the Conservatives.
Charles Tannock, the speech, the referendum, was it a provocation or a constructive step?
It's a very constructive step, and one that I'm very proud that my Prime Minister delivered, because it was a long-awaited speech. It's lanced the boil, to use the English expression, in terms of where we stand on the referendum, in terms of connecting with an increasingly Eurosceptic British public. It also shoots the fox of UKIP, which were threatening us politically in every respect, and not just on the European issue, because they had diversified as a party. So I'm delighted. It's a balanced speech. It lays out the view that people like myself, who are very much in favour of the United Kingdom staying in the European Union, is the official position of the Conservative Party. It's one that David Cameron believes in, but it also connects democratically in terms of consent at the general election, at the referendum after a renegotiation. And David Cameron is going to be making modest requests for repatriation of powers, not a wholesale reorganisation. All we're asking for at the moment that I'm aware of, other than the Justice and Home Affairs, which we can opt out anyway this year, is the issue of social chapter and employment legislation, which we had the opt-out between 1992 and 1997, and the Socialist Prime Minister Tony Blair opted in. So we want to have the status quo ante on that and on certain Justice and Home Affairs. And other than that, at the moment, there's no other clear objectives that we have in mind.
First of all, the question of the strength of this speech is how the people in Europe understood this speech. And we see that we are more confused. It's about an internal and domestic question that Mr. Cameron takes in hostage the evolution and the stability in European Union, and even the city has had to pay for this speech because of the diminishing value of the auctions, and also the business milieu, which is influenced, and I'm glad, because I prefer, of course, that UK can be still in Europe, member of Europe, but a loyal member, and not so, bad player. So you cannot be member in Europe just to pick what you want to eat and not to take the menu, as we say now.
Now that's a very interesting point. Guido Westerwelle, Germany's foreign minister, right after the speech said, look, there will be no cherry picking.
Well, it's complete nonsense. Already we have variable geometry, to use the English expression. We're not in the euro, and the eurozone has to go further down the path of integration if it is to resolve the eurozone crisis. We're not in Schengen. We didn't sign the fiscal compact, which will probably have to be part of this new treaty proposed by the Germans in 2016-17. So already we have a lot of variation in the way Europe is arranged, and Britain has a slightly less detached. I won't say semi-detached, but it's slightly more on the periphery, and we want to be there. That is the mood of the British people. That's what they request from their politicians. We don't want to have a European Union looking into every nook and cranny of our daily lives and regulating every aspect of our economy. I'm a doctor of medicine by training. The Working Time Directive, which came in under health and safety, means that doctors cannot be trained properly now as surgeons because they can't work more than 48 hours a week. And that is getting a lot of criticism from the NHS employers, from the surgeons as a profession, and so on. Why do we need that? Surely those kind of things have got nothing to do with the single market. We believe strongly in the single market, in the economic issues to do with competition law, state aid, but we don't need to have that kind of regulation imposed on us from Brussels.
Now, Catherine Todman, we understand the British point of view. They say, look, we want an a la carte Europe.
Not quite a la carte. That's an exaggeration. We want a Europe which accommodates certain
you're quite happy
states.
To be on the periphery and not. What should the how should the European partners react to this?
What we understand is UK wants to take what is an advantage for UK, and doesn't want to share the solidarity.
And that's not acceptable.
And
you're telling us?
Because Europe was built on solidarity and friendship too, and on some common rules. So if you refuse some common rules, you give difficulty for the construction. For example, okay, Mr. Cameron spoke about unique market, but we don't want commonly and in majority to have a unique market against the people, against social aspects, because they are part of it. We don't want that people pay by unemployment the high price of the crisis. And Mr. Cameron didn't speak at all about investments, about growth, about jobs. And we know that it is so important for British people who pay also the price of the crisis of euro, because if UK is not member of the Eurozone, they are in the same era, in the same market. So they have the disadvantage on the economical point of view, on the social point of view, and Mr. Cameron is just taking a position because of the UKIP, because of the ultra conservative people.
Do you agree that Mr. Cameron has surrendered to the Eurosceptic wing?
I don't agree at all. I think Mr. Cameron has always been a Euro realist. He wants Europe doing more, doing less, but doing it more effectively. And we want to be in Europe, not run by Europe, to use the phrases. But I mean, the reality is somewhat different in terms of solidarity. Britain is the second biggest net contributor. We are subsidizing Europe. We are net contributors after Germany, the biggest. So the idea we don't show any solidarity towards the poorer, newer countries just isn't true. And we want the European budget, of course, to change. Less money to farmers, more for science and research. Those are our priorities. But it is true that the British people probably don't share the same European love for the project of more integration, a federal country, a super state called Europe. They don't have the same European identity. They would say they're British first, and then perhaps they might think they're European, but way down the list. This is something which does separate us because of the Channel, historically, for many reasons. But we were also the liberators of Europe in terms of many wars where we've intervened. We wish to be part of the European Union, but it isn't quite the same feeling that is shared by many Europeans, particularly of the left on the continent, who want a deeper federal super state. And that is their choice. And that is what we respect, for them to choose for themselves. But give us the chance to carve out our own position, slightly less part of this federal project.
Catherine Todman, what do you expect to happen in the coming years? Because the referendum, if it's held, won't be until 2016, 2017.
17.
Now,
it's a long time.
It's a
in the
long
period.
time. Now,
It's a
think
long
about the
time.
next EU summit. David Cameron will arrive in Brussels. We know what he wants to achieve. What do you expect will happen?
But Mr. Cameron was cautious because he knows that he cannot impose certain points because he knows that he has no majority. So the problem for him is to be strong and not to ask too much. So it's a very ambiguous position, very difficult. That's why I don't understand the strategy. I can understand the strategy in the political life of UK, but I don't understand why Mr. Cameron gives this message now to say, look, I say I want to stay, but I make your bashing.
Eurobashing, so he's blackmailing his partners.
So I want to say to Mr. Tannock, please, we lost the referendum in France. We thought it was important to have it positively because of what you say, because to serve the project, European project, and democracy and transparency and the way the citizens are confident. And then we lost. And why? Because every problem is the responsibility of Europe. Every difficulty is Europe. So the Europe bashing gives no in referendum. And this is a sort of, red light. Be careful.
We know the
Because
risks.
If you go,
We know the risks.
If you go with such a Europe bashing, with such a discussion in which you will have a sort of hostility, not only from the governments, but also from the citizen. Why? Because what you propose and what Mr. Cameron proposed is to go in a Europe which is less protective for people.
Well, it's ironic, of course, that in the famous referendum in France for the French Constitution, the left, Mrs. Trotman's party, were against the Constitution. They campaigned against it, and therefore
the party was very split.
It was
This
split,
party-
but a
the
large
party
chunk of the
made a
socialists
positive campaign.
were against the European Constitution because they saw this as a capitalist club. We were against the Constitution because we thought it was too much of an integrationalist project for us. But we ended up with the Lisbon Treaty. When we were promised a referendum in the United Kingdom, we never got it because we had the Lisbon Treaty instead. And by the time the Conservatives got to power, it was too late. It was up and running. So we do have a problem in Britain in terms of the democratic deficit, in terms of consent. The view of the Conservatives, we need to regain consent. I personally think that all the recent opinion polls are showing a shift in favour of staying in the European Union.
But do you agree with the point that Mr. Cameron will be marginalised within the Council because of this blackmail, as it's perceived by the French and the Germans?
We believe we may have one or two allies who also may want to change one or two of these things, like the Working Time Directive, like the Dutch. We believe they may be supported. We'll find out in due course. But the point is that you have to understand the dynamics of the British democratic process. If we don't re-establish some sort of democratic consent to the whole European membership for Britain, I think this problem will fester and fester.
Catherine Trotman, in 4 years' time, imagine there will be this referendum. Will Britain stay in Europe? Are you confident that in the end the British people will understand their interests?
First, we have European elections. And I consider that this speech was totally out of the political agenda of Europe.
Not out of our European elections. It'd be very important for us.
And European elections. What is the message of the Conservative with Mr. Cameron for the next European elections for the Parliament?
Well, I hope to be a candidate.
You
I
are
can
in,
answer that.
you are out. What do you want to do? And do you imagine that playing this role, your friends, your Conservative friends, will be in difficulty of your position? So the result is a global result in Europe, not only for UK. So there is an influence of this message, and this message was listened to very carefully. So he wanted to play a sort of effect for the next British national elections and the referendum. But first, we have elections. And why I speak like that? Because the ultra-liberal policy we had is the reason of the crisis. And Mr. Cameron, his speech, just take the same receipts. So, okay, it will be a clarification. So in a certain way, UK want with Mr. Cameron a clarification, we will go to the debate. we will go to
Now,
the
funnily
debate.
enough, on the issue of banking and capital adequacy, we actually want to raise the levels, not decrease them, which is one of the views which some of the European banks, the Germans, wanted. So we actually want a well-regulated financial services sector. And one of the things that gives me a lot of optimism that we will be able to claw back some powers is that there is now an agreement in the European Banking Authority in London for a double majority. The countries in the Eurozone have to have a majority, and they will be the 17, and the 10 outside, led by Britain, have to have a majority, so that no regulations could be used to, as it were, impact
But you
negatively
agree
on
that
the
by
city.
making this speech, David Cameron actually fuels Euroscepticism?
No, I think, on the contrary, I think he has shot the fox, to use the English expression, of UKIP and those Conservatives who want out of the European Union, because we now have a pathway, a roadmap.
But they sort of hijacked the agenda, you're telling me.
If I'm a candidate next year, which I hope to be, it will be much easier for me going around London, my region, talking about the real issues and how we're going to settle them, and talking about Europe for once, not talking about transport, health and education, which has been the tradition in my country during European elections, talking about domestic politics. I can talk about where I stand, and I can make the case at the doorstep why I believe Britain should stay in the European Union. It's a much clearer agenda for the European elections next year and the general election the year after.
Very briefly, Catherine Trotman, at this stage, is Britain an asset for Europe or a liability?
I think that for the moment, UK is sort of a problem, and
we pay a lot of money to be a problem.
But you know, we pay the most important part of the British rabbit, like French. So
The rebate.
You know, the rebate.
We are still net contributors of £7 billion.
But, you know,
pounds.
so it will be very interesting to see if it's a sort of gesture, a position for to knock the fox, or if it is shoot the fox, or if it is serious. So the first step is to be coherent, and I wait because I'm not sure that this can be successful.
Well,
because why? Why? Because I know the UKIP, and the UKIP will be more nearer of the more nationalistic parties of Europe, and I don't think that this is a good thing.
Well, their vote is going down anyway, UKIP vote, immediately after. So.
That's what you believe. Well, we'll be watching this very closely. Thank you very much, Catherine Trotman and Charles Tannock. Now, please stay with us. After the news break, I'll bring you an interview with Karel de Gucht. He's the EU's Trade Commissioner. Amidst the current crisis, I will ask him whether Europe is well equipped to face competition in an increasingly globalized world. Thank you.